My woke professor thought she could just cancel my senior speech, shut me down because my ideas didn't fit her perfect little ideological box. Big mistake. Huge. Because Dr. Albright had no clue that silencing me would unleash a chain reaction. One that ended with me digging up the skeletons in her closet and getting her canceled, permanently. Yeah, the email notification popped up, innocent looking at first, but the words inside hit like ice water. My speech? Cancelled. Wiped from the schedule just days before I was due to present. The reason? Pure woke garbage. According to Professor Albright, my meticulously researched presentation on economic policy was now suddenly, potentially problematic, and risked creating an unsafe environment. Unsafe? For who? People allergic to facts? My mind raced, anger flaring hot and fast. This wasn't academic feedback. This was censorship, plain and simple, wrapped in flimsy buzzwords. She thought she had all the power, hiding behind her PhD and her lectures on privilege. She had no idea the game had just changed. Her attempt to bury my work wasn't the end. It was the spark that ignited the firestorm that would consume her entire career. Before Professor Albright decided to torpedo my final year, life was, well, normal. Predictable, even. My name's Mark, and like a lot of guys finishing up college, my main focus was getting that political science degree and figuring out the next step. My routine was pretty basic. Drag myself to morning classes, survive on lukewarm coffee, work shifts bussing tables downtown to keep my car running and afford ramen, then cram study sessions late into the night. Graduation was on the horizon, maybe grad school, maybe a junior analyst job somewhere. The details were fuzzy, but the goal was clear: finish strong. This senior seminar wasn't just another class. It was the big one, the capstone, the culmination of 4 years of work. The final presentation was a massive part of our grade, our chance to really show what we'd learned. I wasn't raised in some hyper-political echo chamber. My family taught me to think for myself, to look at facts, and yet to actually listen to people you disagree with. Imagine that, right? Common sense wasn't a dirty word. I came to university expecting vigorous debate, challenging ideas, professors who pushed you to sharpen your arguments, not shut them down. Poli-sci drew me in because it's messy and complex. Competing interests, real-world consequences, data that doesn't always tell a simple story. I liked digging into the numbers, tracing policy effects, understanding why things worked or didn't. Honestly, the campus activism, the pronoun police, the constant search for microaggressions, it wasn't really my scene. I just wanted to learn, graduate, and get on with things. The seminar felt like the perfect place to tackle a meaty topic, do some real research, and present a solid, evidence-based case. Everything felt stable, on track. Until Dr. Albright arrived and brought her special brand of chaos with her. Dr. Eleanor Albright. She was the department's resident woke warrior, relatively new but already infamous. Probably late 30s, always dressed in ethically sourced fabrics, and carried herself with an air of weary enlightenment, like she bore the weight of the world's injustices on her shoulders. Her reputation preceded her. Syllabi dripping with critical theory jargon, class discussions that felt more like struggle sessions focused on identity politics than actual academic inquiry. She had this unnerving habit of using complex academic phrases that sounded profound but often dissolved into meaninglessness if you actually tried to pin them down. Her office door looked like a protest sign collage. And the pronoun introductions on day one? Fine, whatever, but she did it with this intense stare, scanning our faces like a high-tech bias detector, practically daring someone to look uncomfortable. She talked a lot about inclusivity and safe spaces. Non-stop. But you quickly realized safe meant agreeing with Dr. Albright. Her inclusivity had sharp, invisible borders. Step outside them, even with a polite question challenging the narrative, and you'd get the treatment. The slight, condescending tilt of the head, the faint smirk she probably thought no one saw, the passive-aggressive comment about needing to interrogate your assumptions. I saw it happen to others. You could feel the chill descend on the room. Smart students suddenly hesitant to speak, measuring every word, terrified of uttering some newly forbidden phrase. It wasn't a learning environment, it was an ideological minefield, and she was the one planting the mines. My first direct hit came early on, maybe week 3 or 4. We had to submit our preliminary ideas for the big final presentation. I was genuinely interested in the economic impacts of specific immigration policies, labor market effects, fiscal contributions, the kind of stuff you analyze with data sets and economic models. Seemed like standard political economy to me. I handed in my brief proposal outline feeling pretty good about it. A few days later she flagged me down after class, waving my proposal sheet like it was slightly contaminated. "Mark," she started, her voice adopting that soft, concerned tone that always set my teeth on edge. "Your research question is structured. But the focus concerns me." "Concerns you how, Professor?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Well," she sighed, tapping the paper, "it's very numerically driven. Don't you feel the ethical imperative is to center the narrative on the lived experiences of the displaced populations? Focusing purely on economic metrics can inadvertently reinforce objectifying, even xenophobic, frameworks." She then helpfully suggested I pivot my entire research to analyzing neo-colonial power dynamics inherent in border security. "Yeah, right." I tried to explain respectfully that while the human perspective was vital, my specific academic interest was the empirical economic data, a valid and crucial part of the policy puzzle. I wasn't trying to dehumanize anyone, I was trying to analyze quantifiable effects. Her smile became thin, almost brittle. "Of course, Mark, academic freedom is a principle we value," she said, the words sounding utterly insincere. "But we must also be mindful of the impact of our research. We must ensure it doesn't cause harm or validate problematic viewpoints. Perhaps you should reflect further on a more sensitive approach." I walked away from that conversation with a knot tightening in my stomach. That wasn't feedback, it was ideological policing. She wasn't questioning my methods, she was questioning my right to even ask the question if the potential answer didn't fit her worldview. The disruption wasn't subtle anymore. It was a clear warning shot across the bow. This seminar wasn't going to be about learning, it was going to be about surviving Dr. Albright's woke gauntlet. After that suggestion to change my topic, things definitely got colder. Dr. Albright seemed to have put a little mental asterisk next to my name. In class it became almost predictable. If I tried to offer a perspective grounded in classical liberal thought, or brought up data challenging the week's designated oppression narrative, I'd often get cut off with a sharp, "Okay, Mark, let's hear from someone else," or she'd twist my words into some strawman argument that was easy for her to knock down. "So, Mark, you're essentially arguing that systemic issues don't matter?" she'd ask, putting me instantly on the defensive. Other times, my raised hand would just be ignored completely, while she enthusiastically called on the students who had mastered her specific vocabulary of buzzwords, problematizing, intersectionality, hegemonic structures. It was infuriatingly transparent. I wasn't trying to provoke, I was trying to debate, to engage critically like we were supposed to. But critical thinking was only applauded when it flowed in her pre-approved direction. The assigned readings tilted even more heavily towards one viewpoint. Any dissenting scholarship was presented as historical artifact, an example of flawed paradigms or inherently biased perspectives. We spent 2 entire classes deconstructing a single op-ed from a center-right publication, not analyzing its arguments, but hunting for microaggressions and dog whistles under Albright's guidance. It felt like an exercise in confirmation bias. When I tentatively asked if we could apply the same critical lens to some of the dense, jargon-filled critical theory texts she assigned, looking for their potential biases or logical fallacies, she shot me a look that could freeze water. "That's a false equivalence, Mark," she snapped. "We need to understand how power operates. Some frameworks challenge power, others reinforce it. It's not the same." Translation: her side was pure and objective. Any other perspective was inherently suspect. Then came the midterm paper. I chose to analyze the historical evolution of free speech jurisprudence in the U.S. I worked hard on it, made sure my arguments were balanced, cited Supreme Court cases meticulously, addressed counterarguments, basically, did everything a solid academic paper requires. I felt confident. I got it back with a C+ scrawled on the front, bleeding red ink. The comments were infuriatingly vague, lacks sufficient engagement with critical perspectives, analysis could be more nuanced, doesn't fully explore the power dynamics at play. No concrete examples of where my analysis fell short or how it lacked nuance. Just ideological complaints disguised as academic feedback. Meanwhile, I saw a classmate, one of Albright's favorites who always echoed her talking points, beaming over an A- for a paper that basically regurgitated Albright's lecture notes on Foucault, complete with questionable sourcing I happened to notice. Okay, now it felt really personal. This wasn't just bias, it felt punitive, like I was being actively penalized for not conforming. The frustration churned inside me. I wasn't the only one. I started cautiously talking to a couple of other students who looked equally stressed during discussions. They saw it too. The way Albright shut down certain questions, the obvious favoritism, the feeling that you had to self-censor to survive. We weren't imagining it. The final straw before the presentation debacle happened during a class on campus activism. We were discussing safe spaces versus free speech. I cautiously made a point about the marketplace of ideas, how sometimes confronting bad ideas openly is more effective than trying to suppress them. Dr. Albright stopped the entire class. She turned to me, her voice dangerously soft. "Mark," she said, making sure everyone was listening, "while the marketplace of ideas is a quaint liberal concept, it ignores the reality of harm. Are you suggesting that the discomfort of privileged students engaging with abstract ideas is more important than the actual psychological harm inflicted on marginalized students when hateful or invalidating speech is platformed?" She framed it perfectly to make me sound like an insensitive jerk, completely misrepresenting my point about debating policy, not platforming hate. I tried to clarify, but she just waved a dismissive hand. "We've spent enough time on this tangent. Let's move back to the reading." She shut me down, publicly painted me as callous, and moved on, leaving me simmering with impotent rage. The message was crystal clear. Dissent would not be tolerated, and dissenters would be publicly shamed. My unease had fully transformed into cold, hard anger. This wasn't teaching. It felt like psychological warfare disguised as social justice. Despite the constant feeling of walking on eggshells and Dr. Albright's undisguised disapproval, I wasn't going to just roll over for the final presentation. This was my capstone, damn it. I adjusted my initial topic slightly, deciding to do a critical analysis of the measurable outcomes of corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) initiatives. My thesis wasn't controversial, or at least it shouldn't have been. While well-intentioned, many corporate DEI programs lacked rigorous success metrics, often functioned as performative PR, and some data even suggested they could inadvertently create resentment or fail to improve promotion rates for the very groups they aim to help. I wasn't arguing against diversity, I was questioning the effectiveness of specific, widely adopted methods. It was grounded in business management studies, organizational psychology, and economic data. Perfectly legitimate for a poli-sci seminar looking at policy implementation. But I knew deep down Albright would hate it simply because it dared to suggest her sacred cows might not be producing the promised milk. I went into overdrive with the research. I spent countless hours buried in library databases, pulling up peer-reviewed studies, corporate reports, reputable surveys, and economic analyses. I cross-referenced everything. Every single claim in my outline was backed by multiple, credible sources. I wasn't bringing opinions, I was bringing receipts. Mountains of them. I compiled a detailed outline, a hefty bibliography that cited scholars from across the spectrum, and slides that presented the data clearly. I made absolutely sure it followed every stupid formatting rule in her syllabus down to the last comma. I submitted the whole package electronically, well before the deadline, feeling a grim sense of determination. Let her find fault with this. Days turned into a week. Silence. Other students mentioned getting emails with feedback, questions, or formal approval of their topics. From Albright? Nothing. Just digital crickets. Then, finally, late one Thursday night, the email notification chimed. My stomach clenched. It wasn't feedback. It wasn't approval. It was a verdict. Dr. Albright, in her infinite wisdom, had deemed my topic fundamentally problematic. She claimed it relied on frameworks that risk minimizing the significance of systemic barriers, and could inadvertently create a hostile environment for students from marginalized backgrounds. She didn't challenge a single data point, didn't question a single source. Just vague accusations based on potential hurt feelings. She then strongly recommended, which sounded suspiciously like an order, that I select a more constructive topic, helpfully suggesting I could analyze the successes of affirmative action, or the importance of intersectional frameworks in policy. Pure, unadulterated rage surged through me. This was it. This was the blatant censorship I'd been dreading. Hostile environment, the ultimate woke get-out-of-jail-free card, used to silence anything inconvenient. My weeks of rigorous research dismissed with meaningless jargon because the potential conclusions made her uncomfortable. I fired back an email, polite, professional but firm. I methodically laid out how my topic met all course criteria, how it was based entirely on empirical evidence and peer-reviewed research, and how academic rigor demanded we assess policy effectiveness, not just intent. I quoted the university's own stated commitment to academic freedom and viewpoint diversity. I assured her my presentation would be factual and respectful, not inflammatory. I hit send, my heart pounding. Her reply was almost instantaneous. It was brutally short, colder than a witch's heart in a brass bra. Mark, given the persistent concerns regarding the potential negative impact and inherent problematic nature of your chosen research area on classroom safety and student well-being, I have made the executive decision to remove your presentation from the final seminar schedule. Your grade will be determined by your prior coursework. I trust you will use this opportunity for reflection on the responsibilities that accompany academic inquiry. Cancelled. Erased. Silenced. Weeks of intense work incinerated by ideological fiat. My GPA, my final grade, potentially impacted. But it was the sheer arrogance, the abuse of power, the absolute hypocrisy that truly infuriated me. She wrapped herself in the flag of safety and inclusion, while wielding her authority like a cudgel to enforce conformity. She thought she could just snap her fingers and make inconvenient research disappear? She thought her woke credentials made her untouchable? Oh hell no. That burning anger solidified into something cold and sharp. This wasn't just about a grade or a presentation anymore. This was about principle. She had crossed a line. And now I was going to find a way to make her regret it. The hunt was on. The fury didn't fade, but it sharpened into focus. Okay, Albright canceled my speech. Fine. But I wasn't going down without a fight. Complaining to the department head seemed like the obvious first step, and I started meticulously documenting everything. The emails, the timeline, her vague justifications versus my specific research proposal, the university's academic freedom policies. But a cynical voice in my head kept whispering, is it enough? She was slippery, a master of bureaucratic deflection and woke speak. She could easily paint this as her protecting vulnerable students from my problematic ideas. It would be my word, the disgruntled student, against hers, the concerned professor. I needed something more. Something concrete. Something personal. That's when my focus shifted from my canceled presentation to Dr. Albright herself. She loved to reference her own scholarly work in lectures, holding it up as the gold standard of critical engagement. Her faculty profile boasted a list of publications, journal articles, book chapters, her dissertation. She seemed so sure of her intellectual high ground. Maybe, just maybe, her pedestal had some cracks in it. I wasn't expecting buried treasure, maybe just an inconsistency, a poorly argued point, something to show she wasn't infallible. So, I became a research detective, but my target was now Albright's academic output. Hours melted away in the digital library stacks. I pulled up her articles, wading through the dense thickets of jargon. It was mostly predictable stuff, hitting all the expected critical theory notes. But then, reading an article she published a couple of years back on decolonizing the curriculum, a specific paragraph jumped out at me. It had a different rhythm, a different vocabulary almost, compared to the surrounding text. It felt borrowed. A hunch, maybe fueled by resentment, made me copy that paragraph. I pasted it into a standard online plagiarism checker. Nothing popped up immediately from the big journal databases. But then I got more specific. I took key phrases from that paragraph, the more unique-sounding academic terms, and started plugging them into deeper search engines, including archives of older, less prominent international journals and conference proceedings. Boom. There it was. An article from 2004, published in a niche European education journal by a professor I'd never encountered. I clicked the link, downloaded the PDF, my breath catching in my throat. I scrolled down, and my eyes widened. It wasn't just similar. The paragraph from Albright's recent article was identical. Lifted. Verbatim. No quotes, no footnote, no citation. Just stolen. A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through me. Could it be a one-off mistake? A bizarre formatting error? My gut screamed otherwise. I went back to her publication list with renewed intensity. I started running larger chunks of her other articles through multiple plagiarism detection tools, cross-referencing against dissertation databases, book archives, everything I could access. Another hit. A major section in a chapter she'd contributed to an edited volume on identity politics directly mirrored, sentence after sentence, passages from a PhD dissertation completed 5 years before hers at a completely different university. Again, zero attribution. Then another find, this time in one of her earliest published articles. Several key sentences were identical to lines from a book review published by someone else a year earlier. This wasn't an accident. This was a pattern. This was systemic fraud. The final, jaw-dropping discovery came when I examined her own doctoral dissertation, the very foundation of her academic career. The abstract and parts of the introduction contained phrasing, specific theoretical claims, and even whole sentences that were indistinguishable from passages in a conference paper presented by another scholar 2 full years before Albright supposedly defended her original work. The irony was almost physically painful. Dr. Eleanor Albright, the moral arbiter, the gatekeeper of safe ideas, the professor who accused my data-driven research of lacking integrity, was a fraud. A serial plagiarist who had built her career, her entire woke persona, on intellectual theft. She lectured us endlessly about challenging power structures while abusing her own power. She condemned harmful speech while committing one of the most profound harms in academia. The hypocrisy was astounding, sickening. A cold, hard clarity settled over me. This changed everything. This wasn't just about getting my presentation reinstated anymore. This was about exposing a fundamental dishonesty at the heart of her authority. She hadn't just given me leverage. She'd handed me a nuclear bomb. And I knew exactly where I needed to aim it. The next 48 hours were a blur of meticulous documentation. I became an evidence-compiling machine. I created a detailed report for each instance of plagiarism. Side-by-side screenshots of her text next to the original source text, with the identical passages highlighted in glaring yellow. Full citations, publication dates, links to the original documents online. I cross-referenced everything, checked it twice, then checked it again. It had to be airtight. No room for doubt, no wiggle room for excuses. I saved multiple digital copies and printed out a thick binder's worth of hard copies. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer gravity of what I held. This felt bigger than just me now. With the dossier complete, binder feeling heavy in my backpack, I composed a carefully worded email to Dr. Ramirez, the political science department head. He was an older guy, serious, known for being tough but fair, definitely not part of Albright's woke clique. I kept the email brief and professional. Dear Dr. Ramirez, I need to request an urgent meeting regarding a matter of serious academic integrity within the department. He replied within an hour, agreeing to see me the following afternoon. Walking into Dr. Ramirez's spacious, book-lined office felt like stepping onto a stage. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I took a deep breath, sat down and calmly, methodically, laid out the entire story. I started with the canceled presentation, showing him the email chain, explaining my topic and Albright's vague, ideological reasons for shutting it down. I established the context of her bias against me. Then I opened the binder. I presented the plagiarism evidence, walking him through each case, pointing out the verbatim passages, the lack of citation, the timeline inconsistencies. Dr. Ramirez listened in stony silence, his expression shifting from neutral curiosity to visible shock, then deepening into a grim frown. He picked up pages, read the highlighted sections closely, clicked on the links I'd included in the digital copy I also provided. The air in the room grew heavy. When I finally finished, he leaned back, rubbed his temples and let out a long breath. Mr. Davies, he said, his voice strained. This is profoundly disturbing. If this evidence is accurate, it represents a severe breach of academic ethics. He looked me straight in the eye. Thank you for bringing this to my attention with such thorough documentation. The university takes plagiarism extremely seriously. I assure you this will be investigated immediately and thoroughly, following strict protocols. He asked me to maintain confidentiality while the official process unfolded. Leaving his office, I felt a wave of conflicting emotions, relief that I'd been heard, anxiety about the fallout, but also a fierce, almost righteous sense of anticipation. The machine was now in motion. Albright might not know it yet, but her carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. And I had just lit the fuse. The clock started ticking. I knew the university bureaucracy could move slowly, but Ramirez seemed genuinely appalled. Word travels fast in academic circles, even when things are supposed to be confidential. I had a strong suspicion Albright would sense something was wrong, maybe hear whispers or notice Ramirez's suddenly frosty demeanor towards her. The next scheduled senior seminar session felt like fate intervening. My presentation was still officially cancelled, wiped off the schedule, but there was no way I was missing this class. I needed to be there. I needed to see her face. I took a seat near the back, trying to look casual, just another student observing. But my nerves were frayed. Albright entered the room and I watched her closely. Was it my imagination or did she seem off? Her usual air of unshakable woke certainty seemed slightly cracked. She fidgeted with her notes more than usual, her smile seemed tighter, her gaze occasionally flickered towards the door. Maybe Ramirez had already spoken to her, given her a preliminary warning. A fellow student finished their presentation. Something suitably aligned with Albright's worldview, of course, and Albright mechanically asked for questions. A couple of the usual suspects raised their hands, offering fawning comments disguised as questions. Then my hand went up. Slowly, deliberately. Albright scanned the room, her eyes momentarily skipping over me before snapping back, widening almost imperceptibly. A flicker of pure panic? Or just annoyance? She hesitated. The silence stretched. Every student turned to look at me, probably wondering what the hell I was doing. Finally, with visible reluctance, she called my name, her voice strained. Yes, Mark. I stood up. The air crackled with tension. All eyes were on me. Thank you, Dr. Albright, I began, keeping my voice level and clear, projecting across the room. Actually, I don't have a question about Jessica's presentation, which was very thorough. I let that hang for a beat. I was just sitting here reflecting on my own presentation. The one you canceled because it was deemed problematic and potentially harmful to the learning environment. I saw her jaw tighten. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the lectern. A faint flush started creeping up her neck. It really got me thinking, I continued, locking my gaze onto hers, refusing to look away, about the crucial importance of academic integrity. You know, intellectual honesty? Giving credit where credit is due? Standards we should all uphold, especially those guiding young scholars. I paused again, letting the implication sink in. Which is why I found it particularly striking. When doing some research recently, I stumbled upon some uncanny similarities between certain passages in your published work and previously published material by other academics. For instance, in your 2019 article in the Journal of Critical Pedagogy, there's a section that appears to be copied verbatim, without any citation, from a 2004 paper by a Dr. Du Bois. Quite a coincidence, wouldn't you say? A collective intake of breath swept through the room. Students exchanged wide-eyed, shocked glances. Whispers erupted. Albright's face drained of all color, then turned a blotchy, furious red. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice trembling, losing its carefully modulated academic tone. "This is an outrageous accusation. Slander. You're fabricating this because you're angry about your inappropriate topic being rejected." "Oh, it's not just that one instance, Professor," I pressed on calmly, feeling a cold wave of vindication wash over me. My voice didn't shake. "There are other examples. Significant portions of your chapter in The Politics of Identity Anthology, published just last year, bear a remarkable word-for-word resemblance to sections of Dr. Chen's doctoral dissertation from 2015. And then there's the matter of your own dissertation abstract echoing Dr. Hassan's conference paper from 2 years prior." "Enough!" Albright shrieked, slamming her hand on the lectern, losing control completely. "This is harassment. You are maliciously disrupting this class. I demand you leave this room immediately." She pointed a shaking finger towards the door, her eyes wild with panic and fury. But right at that moment, as if on cue, the classroom door swung open. Standing there, his face etched with profound disappointment and stern authority, was Dr. Ramirez, the department head. He must have been alerted, perhaps by a student texting him, or maybe he anticipated fireworks after our meeting. Seeing Ramirez, Albright completely unraveled. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. She spun towards him, launching into a desperate, incoherent tirade. "Dr. Ramirez, you need to stop this. This student is making baseless attacks. It's a personal vendetta. He's trying to silence me because of my commitment to social justice. This is retaliation." Her voice cracked, bordering on hysterical. It was a spectacular implosion, a desperate attempt to play the victim that only screamed guilt. Dr. Ramirez didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped fully into the classroom, his quiet authority instantly silencing the room. "Dr. Albright," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This discussion needs to continue in my office. Now." He gestured firmly towards the hallway. Utterly defeated, shoulders slumped, Albright scrambled to gather her belongings, avoiding everyone's gaze, especially mine. The righteous fury was gone, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. As Dr. Ramirez quietly but firmly escorted her out of the room, a stunned, almost breathless silence descended upon the rest of us. Then the whispers started again, louder this time. Students weren't looking at me like I was the villain anymore. They were looking at me with awe, shock, maybe even a little gratitude. The Queen of Woke had been dethroned, exposed by her own hypocrisy in the most public way possible. Watching her retreat down the hall under Ramirez's stern watch? Yeah, that was a satisfaction deeper and more complete than any A+ grade could ever provide. The fallout was swift and brutal, exactly as Dr. Ramirez had implied it would be. The university's formal academic integrity investigation moved much faster than I anticipated, likely spurred by the public nature of the confrontation and the mountain of undeniable evidence I'd provided. Within weeks, the findings were conclusive. Dr. Eleanor Albright had engaged in repeated, significant acts of plagiarism spanning several years and multiple publications, including her doctoral dissertation. It was career suicide, self-inflicted. First came the immediate suspension, pending the full academic Senate review. Then, maybe 2 months later, the official announcement filtered through the department grapevine and eventually became public record. Dr. Albright's employment contract with the university was terminated. Fired. Effectively blacklisted from academia. Her nameplate disappeared from the office door almost overnight. Poof. Gone. Cancelled for real by her own actions. As for me in the seminar, Dr. Ramirez took over teaching the remaining classes himself. He called me into his office shortly after the investigation concluded. He formally apologized for what I had experienced with Dr. Albright and confirmed that her reasons for canceling my presentation were completely unfounded and inappropriate. He reviewed my original proposal, my research notes, and the presentation slides I had prepared. He deemed the topic valid and the research solid. I was given the opportunity to present my work directly to him and another senior faculty member. I delivered my analysis of DEI program effectiveness, focusing on the data, just as I had planned. Felt good. I received a grade based purely on the merit of my work, a solid A- as it turned out. Life eventually settled back into its rhythm. I graduated with my class, the seminar ordeal fading into a wild story rather than an open wound. I landed a decent entry-level job doing policy analysis for a research firm, a place where data actually matters more than feelings. The campus moved on as campuses always do. But I haven't forgotten Dr. Albright or the lessons learned. It was a crash course in how easily ideologies, even supposedly virtuous ones like wokeness, can curdle into tools for censorship, bullying, and covering up personal failings. Albright preached social justice while practicing intellectual theft. She demanded safety, while creating a hostile environment for anyone who dared to think differently. There's a deep, quiet satisfaction in knowing I didn't just let her silence me. I stood my ground, trusted the facts, and ultimately, her own hypocrisy was her undoing. It wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about accountability. It was about the simple, maybe old-fashioned idea that truth and integrity should actually mean something, especially in academia. Seeing her face the consequences felt like a restoration of balance. And honestly, knowing her woke empire crumbled because of her own fraud, that provides a lasting sense of vindication that feels pretty damn good.